Hi there, patrons, and welcome! I just want to take this opportunity now to thank you so much for your patronage. Thank you so much for your support. I can't tell you how much that means to me and how encouraging it is to know that you would come on over here and become a patron of this page. It means the world to me, and it really is so motivational for me. It's really going to motivate me to continue doing what I do. In this first lesson on this Patreon page, I'm going to talk about the difference between open-voiced singing and closed-voice singing, voce aperta versus voce chiusa, and in particular, I'm going to start teaching you the concept of closed voice, if you're not already familiar with it, and I'm going to show you in the next several videos on this topic clips of me working with my students, teaching them this concept of closed voice from the ground up. And these are all singers of contemporary styles of music. And we're going to talk about and I'm going to show you how it's applicable, yes, even to commercial styles of singing. And so hopefully that will give you another option on your artist palette. It'll give you another technical option for approaching your middle and upper range notes in particular. All right, I didn't want to have to do this and put my glasses on because I'm always afraid it looks like I'm trying to hide something. But the glare from this building is just killing me. So hopefully I look okay and fashionable. Not that it really matters. I'm sitting in a minivan in a parking lot on a Saturday morning. So when we're talking about open versus closed voice, we're really talking about an acoustical phenomenon. If we're thinking in terms of the physiological, open versus closed voice singing, they're really kind of misnomers. Obviously, there are physiological aspects to this. How we shape our vocal tracts determines the acoustical output or the outcome, right? So the shape of our vocal tract has an effect on the spectral characteristics of the sound. For example, with open-voiced singing, generally what happens is as we get higher in the scale, we start to lower the jaw and open the mouth a lot more. And in behind that, we have a narrower pharynx. So it's maybe more open here in the front, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the throat is as open. But with closed voice singing, we have that sort of inverted megaphone shape in which the mouth is comparatively smaller on the same pitch to when we're singing with open voice, the same vowel. But the vocal tract behind that mouth opening, that smaller mouth opening, is actually much larger. There's more space inside the pharynx and the larynx is lower. So obviously there are physiological aspects to open versus closed voice singing. But for the most part, when we're talking about open versus closed voice singing, we're really talking about an acoustical phenomenon. And in particular, we're talking about the relationship between the first formant and the second harmonic. The first formant is the lowest formant frequency, resonance frequency of the resonator tract, the supraglottal vocal tract, and the second harmonic of the sung pitch. So we have the fundamental frequency, which is the pitch that we hear, but that tone is a complex tone made up of multiple harmonics, right? And so we have the first harmonic, which is the fundamental frequency that we perceive as pitch. And then above that, an octave above that, we have the second harmonic. And so we have the first formant of the given vowel. That formant differs from vowel to vowel. So with ah, we have a high first formant. With e, we have a low first formant, and the other vowels fall somewhere in between. So we have this first formant here. And in open voice singing, what happens is, as pitch moves up and the second harmonic moves along with it, we get to this juncture of the first formant and second harmonic. And we have really two options here. In open voice singing, what we do is we couple that first formant and second harmonic, and as pitch rises, we continue to raise that first formant along with it. And we do that by shortening and narrowing the vocal tract. We do that by raising the larynx, narrowing the pharynx, retracting the lips, lowering the jaw, and that basically shortens and narrows the vocal tract, and that raises that first formant so that we can couple those frequencies. Now in closed voice singing, something different happens. So we have this fundamental frequency and second harmonic, first formant. So when pitch rises, we get to this juncture again of the first formant and second harmonic. But instead what we do is we allow those harmonics to continue to rise above the first formant. And then they tune to higher formants. And what we're essentially doing there is we're stabilizing the vocal tract. When we stabilize the vocal tract to some degree, that stabilizes that first formant frequency so that we're not just raising it up continuously. And that is essentially, that's the essence of closed voice singing, voce chiusa. And again, in the upcoming videos, I'm going to explain this concept a whole lot more for you. I'm going to show you samples, clips of other singers singing with closed voice, both operatic singers, classical singers, and singers of contemporary styles of music. Because I want you to hear how it is indeed applicable to contemporary styles. Oftentimes, teachers of contemporary styles, contemporary techniques, will teach open voice as almost the only option to create a sort of commercially viable sound. And when I started retraining technique for contemporary technique and started really turning my attention once again to musical theater in particular and learning to belt, I was doing this on my own, and I was kind of following the advice of a lot of teachers who were saying, you want to teach belt from a yell. And that's really the first form and second harmonic coupling. That's called a yell coupling. And while it is efficient and it feels good, because when you're locking those two frequencies, it actually helps the instrument operate fairly efficiently. I found for myself that artistically, it was extremely limiting for me. Once I got above my break, A, B flat, B, depending on the vowel and the context, in singing open voice, the only thing that I could do was basically yell. And it never sounded musical. I didn't have dynamic control. I had very little dynamic control. And I really had no vibrato and no control over vibrato, because in order to maintain that same coupling, I had to get locked into that. And so there was some rigidity and some inflexibility. And so what happened was I reached out to my friend, Daniel Formica, who's another singing teacher, and I said, I need help with this. I need to figure out what it is that I need to do differently. And I knew that I needed to do something differently, because what I was doing, what I had been trying to do, singing open voice, wasn't working for me. I mean, I can carry open voice up to my A flat 5, which is pretty high up, and I can do that in chest voice. But again, musically, it just wasn't working for me. Even in belting, I found that I didn't like the sound of the belt. And so Daniel started reintroducing me to this concept of closed voice. And it took me, honestly, a couple lessons to really wrap my mind around this concept, because it is initially kind of confusing. Sorry, I was just checking to see my battery. I thought I was running out of time on my camera. But once we start working through the concept and we start hearing other singers using it and we start discovering that in our own voices, then it starts to make a whole lot more sense. And we start being able to explore that a lot more in our singing. And I always teach my students to sing both open and closed. This is my contemporary students. Classical singers will almost exclusively sing in closed voice, with certain exceptions maybe for artistic effect or for characterization. But for contemporary singers, again, we have different options depending on what we want to sing. And as I introduced this concept, almost immediately from my being reintroduced to it, I started teaching this concept to my students, especially my male students. Most of the students in my studio, 80% of my students, are males. And as I started teaching them this concept, it was amazing. It was amazing what it did for their voices, because it just opened up their upper range tremendously. And I have a student, Dalton, and you're going to be seeing some clips of me working with him during his lessons. And he's a baritone. He's got this rich, beautiful voice, and just a stunning voice. And I started introducing this concept to him, and he was working on a song that he was going to be singing with a Broadway star. He was singing a duet with her from Wicked, and she had performed in Wicked. And there's a high A in that, an A4. And for a baritone, that's a challenging note, definitely. And prior to my having introduced him to this concept of voce chiusa, closed voice, or voix mixte, it's really kind of a classical mixed voice, really. He had been just kind of shouting those notes, either that or flipping into falsetto. And he didn't like either of those options. And before that, when he sang an A in public in one of his performances, people would just be like, whoa, that's amazing. That's so impressive. You sang that high note. And I think it's because he was showing strain and he was betraying that effort that it took to sing that. And when I introduced him to this closed voice concept and he started singing those A's with so much more ease, and yet they were huge sounds, full sounds, the audience was somehow less impressed, and people really thought that he was actually singing lower than he actually was. And it's kind of funny because those notes, like, I just remember one day I messaged Daniel Formica on Facebook and I said, guess what? I said, I was just working on How Far I'll Go from Moana, and there's that sustained belted tone, a C5 at the end of the song, and I just belted it in closed voice, and I actually liked how it sounded. And it's just amazing. It was the same thing. It felt good. It felt efficient. It had some ping and some ring and brightness to it, but it didn't sound shouty and yeah, just like a yell. And so if you explore this, I promise you that you're going to like the results. You're going to like having that option, and sometimes you'll sing open and sometimes you'll sing the same note closed. And that's going to be depending on what it is that you want to do with that particular note, that phrase that you're singing. Now let's get back to teaching this concept of closed voice. I've already talked about that relationship of the first formant and the second harmonic. So now let's talk a little bit about the vowel. You've probably heard that term, narrowing the vowel. And really, when we're narrowing the vowel, this is what happens, is we're allowing that vowel to turn over in the passaggio area. And when we're talking about turning over, that again goes back to that relationship of the first formant to the second harmonic. When the vowel turns over, it's because the second harmonic has been allowed to rise above that first formant. That's what turning over is. It's that changing acoustic relationship right there. The vowel turns over. And now it goes into a different tuning. And there are some modifications of the vowel that do take place there. The vowel largely determines the register. And I'm going to be introducing you to some Burton Coffin exercises that have this sort of vowel modification in these vowel adjustments built right into the exercises. And so let's talk a little bit more about the vowel. And I apologize again, I'm not going to be doing a lot of demonstrating here, but let's say that this is the vowel here. This nice big rounded vowel that has all of the overtones, all of its spectral characteristics represented. When we're singing in open voice, we're basically, again, we're raising that first formant right, and the sound gets brighter and brighter and brighter because now we're losing the depth and the warmth in the sound, because that first formant, which would normally help contribute to some of that warmth and depth, has been raised higher and higher and higher. So now basically we've got this vowel. This is the whole vowel in here, spectrally, okay, acoustically. So when we're talking open voice, we're kind of hitting this sort of bullseye a little bit, and we're singing within this small portion of the vowel. That's that brighter portion, that pingy, ringy portion. But we don't have this fullness, this roundedness in the vowel. So when we're singing in closed voice, we actually have the entire vowel represented in the sound because we're stabilizing those formants. We're maintaining the depth. We're maintaining that chiaroscuro, right? That combination of bright and dark in the sound. And of course, that's one of the major goals of classical voice training, to be able to maintain that chiaroscuro timbre that is characteristic of the classical singer, that professionally viable classical timbre. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not applicable or achievable to or by that singer of contemporary commercial music, right? So with the singer of contemporary music, I always describe it this way, that we have these extremes of completely closed, completely open, and splatty. So when it's splatty, it's that yell, hey, right? Very splatty, open, yelly, right? But then there's all this space in between. So a classical singer might be singing kind of here. You don't want to go here because it sounds too dull. It sounds just lackluster and dull. It doesn't have the brights and the highs in there. So a classical singer might kind of sing here, right in the middle of those two extremes where there's bright and dark, right? Warmth and depth, but also that ring in the sound. But then in between splatty and classical sound, there's all this wiggle room in here. And ultimately, for most contemporary singers of contemporary styles, we want to find ourselves somewhere in the middle here, and maybe a little on the brighter side where it sounds a little more conversational as well. And so that's ultimately what I strive for when I'm working on closed voice singing, because I do sing in contemporary styles. I sing a lot of musical theater, which requires a lot of twang and brightness, but I also do sing pop and rock, which isn't necessarily as bright, but I don't want to go all the way to here with it dull and lackluster, or here sounding classical. And so what you'll see in the upcoming videos is me working with my students on trying to find that right balance, trying to find a sound in closed voice that works for their contemporary styles. And if you are a classical singer, hopefully this will reinforce everything that you've been working on with your teacher, that you've been learning, that you've been taught. And if you are a singer of contemporary styles, I really hope that you'll consider adding this to your artist palette, because it's amazing what it can do and the options that it gives you, the alternative ways of singing. It just can open up so many doors for you artistically, technically, even in terms of the repertoire that you sing. Stuff that seems really like a huge stretch for you right now will just suddenly become completely possible. So I hope you'll stay tuned as I explain this concept further. And again, I'm going to show you clips of me working with students and demonstrating this concept, and watching me train these students will hopefully help you wrap your mind around this concept, because again, it took me a little bit of time. It took me a good couple lessons for me to start to understand the difference really between open and closed on certain pitches, and for me a couple more lessons beyond that for me to start really being able to achieve that on a more consistent basis. And and I am here, obviously, excuse me, I'm still recovering from my illness, and my voice kind of skips and cuts out on me sometimes unexpectedly. I probably need to go to see my ENT just to make sure that I'm recovering fully from my illness and everything looks like it's healing up properly. But that's neither here nor there. But stay tuned for those upcoming videos. Really looking forward to the dialogue that I'm sure will ensue. I'm happy to answer all of your questions. My goal here is to really teach you these concepts as best I can in this kind of format. If you're really struggling with it, I would strongly encourage you to connect with me over Skype or Zoom, have a lesson, so that I can make sure that you're really applying these concepts correctly. And this is why I don't want to post this teaching on the YouTube channel, because it's one of those techniques, these concepts that really needs to be done correctly in order for it to be healthy, because we can potentially hurt ourselves if we're misapplying the concepts. So stay tuned, and I really look forward to connecting more with you in this. Take care.